On my podcast at wordcarver.com, I introduced listeners to the story of Tonya Lynette Daniels, who was found dead in a garage in Columbus, Ohio in February of this year, 2019. In that episode, I used the texts of the Columbus Police Department press releases as well as the press releases from our prosecutor, Ron O'Brien, to let listeners know about how Tonya was found, particularly the detail of her red braids, which pointed really to a woman who loved life. One night, I Googled Tonya's name to learn more, and I came upon a picture of her in a legacy book, a woman with blue eyeshadow and red braids, a small smile on her lips. There's a YouTube video of a woman dancing, moved by the Spirit, at Tonya's funeral, held in a tiny church on Livingston Avenue, and I'll put that in the show notes on this YouTube video. I kept scrolling down to see whether there was any more information on her in Google when I came across a book published by Author's House titled Love Brought Me Back by Tonya Daniels, and I felt like somebody had struck a gong close to my head. Was this the Tonya Daniels who had been murdered and raped and left to decompose in a man's garage? Was Tonya Daniels driven by the story she held inside of her so much that she wrote a manuscript and then self-published it? She'd put herself through the same processes that I've been through, writing chapter after chapter, the words carrying hopes and limitations. She wanted so much for her personal story to touch people's minds, and she chose a book cover, just like I do, and submitted that author information. And finally, her book was published on the internet. I can only imagine how she celebrated. Was it with a party or a shy gift of her author copies to closest friends and family? Clearly, there was only one response to finding out that Tonya had written a book. I bought it and I began to read Love Brought Me Back. Daniel's book is written in a style that she most likely wasn't even aware she was using. Most likely she wrote organically as the Spirit moved her to tell the first part of her story and then the next. But as a student of literature, I recognized that her style was a part of a larger tradition, one that dates to 1862 in this country, a tradition actually begun by a woman. That woman, a woman Tonya most likely has never read, was Mary Rowlandson, a 39-year-old wife of a Massachusetts minister who was captured by the Wampanoag people in the depths of winter. Mary Rowlandson was enslaved by the Wampanoag, and she moved with them through the forests on a starvation diet with her Bible in her pocket. During those 3 months that Rowlandson trekked through the snow-laden forests in deep winter, her baby died of starvation and exhaustion in her arms. And when she returned to her own family after being ransomed home, Rowlandson wrote about her experiences through the eyes of a deeply religious woman. Rowlandson tied each experience of living as a slave with the Wampanoag people to a biblical lesson or passage. In this way, Rowlandson cast her suffering into a larger context. She used Bible passages to resolve deep and scarring pain by matching her story with archetypal narratives about God and human salvation. In the making of the American essay edited by John D'Agata, he says on page 19, "I think this is the first great essay that America produced." So the 45 pages of Tonya Daniels' work, Love Brought Me Back, is in this tradition of Rowlandson that began in the 1600s, even though Tonya Daniels was most likely unaware of the lineage of her piece. Even in its length, Love Brought Me Back is more of an extended essay than a book-length manuscript, echoing Rowlandson once again. The opening of the book is heartbreaking for a person who knows how Daniels died, raped and murdered, and hidden away to rot in a garage. Daniels tells her reader in the first sentence of the introduction, this book is to spiritually prepare young women who have been sexually abused for the process of healing. She goes on to tell the reader, as a victim of sexual abuse, I encountered many different emotions, mainly the emotions of loneliness and rejection. I carried these emotions into my teen and adult years, and I am still dealing with them today. However, I'm not alone. This is something the devil wants you to think. God is always with you. That's a strong opening, an opening of hope. Certainly no one would want the person who wrote those words to be found alone, abused, and rejected as a corpse. That goes against the spirit of hope, the spirit which Daniels strove so hard to bring into the center of her life, despite the abuse that had dominated her years of being here. She says at the end of the introduction, I want every woman and every little lady to remember we are all the king's daughters. In chapter 1, Daniels tells the reader that she has 8 boys and 1 deceased daughter. She opens her story by relating her first experience of abuse when she was 7 years old. Her mother worked long hours and brought her boyfriend, a so-called uncle, into the house to watch the children. The man raped Tonya Lynette Daniels when her mother was at work. She says, I asked myself, am I the devil child? I wasn't bad, but things were happening to me. Only by God's grace can I share with you my story, which is my testimony. It is my job, which is my ministry, and if you have an ear to hear, you will, Daniels says. Well, she ended up in children's hospital and the so-called uncle was dismissed from her life. But at the age of 9, a new man, Mr. D, told her that she was his special little girl. The raping began again until Daniels told another little girl, Michelle, who told her mother, who told the principal, and Daniels was taken out of her family and sent to live with Michelle and 3 foster sisters. At 16, Daniels began to use drugs and alcohol to forget her past. She says, I was just a dark spirit continuing to walk this earth, unquote. She had 8 boys, but with her daughter, Daniels says, quote, I couldn't stop smoking crack enough to go to the hospital. I live with that every day, and some days it bothers me more than others. She died in utero. All my children were taken away and adopted. But the women who adopted Daniel's children were kind and allowed her to visit and watch the children grow up. She says, I thank God for all the mothers that God allowed to step in for me. I'm writing this book to confirm that God is real and has always been there, Daniels says. Her narrative takes the reader through her use of alcohol and crack until 2004, when she was standing on the corner of Cleveland and Westerville and met the minister of Grace Church. There she found a family, a woman who cleaned her up and gave her clothes and became her godmom. She says, just like a baby who has made a mess in her diaper, you clean the baby up and throw away the diaper, not the baby. Daniels got clean in fits and starts, but every time she had sex, she would use drugs and then went to jail on parole, where she had the time to get clean and stay clean. When she got out of jail, she fell in love and married her husband. Quote, it took someone to come to me in my darkness, she says. I desired compassion and not sacrifice. She ends that chapter by quoting John 16:33, quote, in the work you have tribulation, but courage, I have overcome the world, unquote. Some of this essay, just like the essay of Daniels' predecessor in literature, Mary Rowlandson, is rambling and discursive and probably would be annoying to readers who like a clean narrative arc, chapters that spin in neat discourse like well-oiled wheels and a tidy conclusion. But this essay, like Rowlandson, comes straight from the heart with little editing. But as I read it, I was amazed that a woman who had smoked crack and been drunk for most of her life could think cogently enough to write a narrative and pair it with biblical passages designed to uplift the reader. So, what do we make of a woman who believed, who asked for salvation, who desired sincerely and earnestly to be with God, and then who ended up dead on the frozen floor of a Columbus garage in a February, raped and murdered, and left to rot? Surely some people would say this proves there isn't a God. On the last page of her essay, Daniels says, Jesus modeled a messy Christianity. She then goes on to ask people to come together to prevent abuse. Be the light of the gospel, she says. Expose it. By writing Love Brought Me Back, Daniels does her work in exposing the abuse that happened to her at the foundation of her life. Abuse that did not allow her to enjoy the natural unfolding of a girlhood into womanhood. But I think that Daniels' narrative isn't about a tidy kind of Christianity that gives people a happy ending. It's about an older version of Christianity, much more like the version found in the ritual of the Stations of the Cross, where worshippers ask to be worthy of a death that is like the death of Jesus, brutal and messy and tortured. Those worshippers understand the absolute falsehood of the prosperity gospel. Their God is not concerned with what happens to the physical body. He is concerned about the condition of the soul. Yes, I sincerely wish that Tonya Daniels had avoided a death that mirrored the most abhorrent pieces of her life. And I wish that she was able to live out an easier life in the way that she truly wanted to live. What happened to her will always be part of a mystery to me, part of the larger mystery of the nature of God and the presence on earth of evil. The man who is accused of raping and murdering Tonya Daniels and the rapes of 2 other women is currently standing trial here in Franklin County. Troy Len Hairston has prior convictions for rape, and one of his alleged victims is 70 years old. I can't end this analysis without Tonya's own blessing for her readers. Be the light of the gospel, she says. Her continuous fight against the evil which entered her life unasked for as a little girl became a struggle against addiction, became the pain of losing her children and the suffering of a death in utter darkness. But rest in peace, Tonya. I hope you are living in the light eternally now. I'm Cynthia Rossi, and this is Word Carver, and you can see more of Word Carver's work with literature and local authors at wordcarver.com and at Word Carver in iTunes. I'm going to put some information about Tonya Daniels in the show notes. Her friends and family are continuing her legacy with something called Unity in the Community, Increase the Peace, Stop the Violence. I'll put some contact information for the people behind this work. Pastor Tonya Keaton at Sunshine Christian Academy and Mount Zion International Healing and Deliverance Ministries on Cleveland Avenue. That's all from me on Word Carver this morning. Have a blessed day.